So I'm going to introduce Goran. So Goran is the host of the Authentic You podcast. This how-to and philosophy-themed coming-of-age career advice podcast has connected with audiences around the world, including reaching a top 30 ranking in 4 countries. Goran is also a graduate of the SFU's The Writers' Studio, and his debut Canadian publication of literary nonfiction is called Furby Call Center, available in Better Next Year, edited by J.J. Lee and published by Tidewater Press. Goran is also the founder of The Inspired, so it's the-inspired.com, which is read in over 130 countries. So we are absolutely delighted to be having this chance to learn from Goran this evening. So please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
You guys hear me? You guys hear me all right? Yeah, welcome. Thank you all for coming tonight. And we will be going through some podcasting magic. And I think it's, I think the presentation is fun, informative, and we'll talk. We're just going to jump straight into what we're going to do today, what it's about, what it's not about. I'm just going to get a little echo from the speaker here, so I'm just going to move a bit. So the goal in the presentation is to share the techniques that I've used to land on the podcasting charts and get noticed. So what I hope that you're going to be able to take away is some of the major concepts that I share with you today, and it's not overly complex. There's a lot of information I share, but if you are interested, one thing Emily you didn't mention, if you want to provide your email addresses, if there's certain bits of info or certain, I guess probably questions or bits of info, you can provide your email address, and if we rush through something, you don't get your answer, we can email you guys after, okay? So again, we're going to cover a wide variety of topics, but it's not a 101 podcasting session. So I just wanted to level set on that. So, but there are a ton of great classes and courses and materials from the Inspiration Lab that I think that you'll be able to pick up and continue at whatever stage of the journey that you're at. So that's kind of the gist of kind of the structure of this class. If we look at the agenda, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to ask you guys, whoever wants to raise their hand, why you're here today. Did a little bit with the early birds that showed up. We'll get into the top 5 questions I think you need to ask if you're getting a podcast started. These are really important if you are interested in really trying to climb the charts. We'll do some podcasting trivia. We'll look at podcasting trends, some global stats and demographics. And we'll get into the top 6 podcasting tips that I think you need to stand out in the crowd. And one of them is number 7 there, which is podcast layer editing, okay? And we'll look at some of the classes and tools and editing, production available at VPL. And we'll close with marketing tips because they are important as well. All right, so let's start with actually, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and actually you already heard most of this stuff already. I think the only thing that you haven't heard is just kind of what happened when I started my podcast a few years ago. I was that was not part of the plan, but you see that I got hit all the way up to 8th in Singapore, got up to 19th recently in Sweden, 26th in Russia, 30th in Canada, 68th in Norway recently, 77 UK, and 90th in Italy. And these are not linear, and I don't want anyone to feel discouraged. It's not a linear runway towards if you are trying to get to the charts. So say you've launched your podcast, 5 people listen to it, 10 people listen to it. Don't get depressed, don't get down. One of the spoiler alert, the first tip is setting up a long runway. So some of these things, what will happen is so you'll own your podcast, but once you put it out there, it literally is now just kind of out there. And what will happen is it will get picked up in different places and ways. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later, and we can certainly come back to it. So here's some of the countries where the podcast has been in. The funny thing that happened here The reason India is number one is because I didn't know what I was doing when I started marketing, and so I set up a Facebook ads, and you actually speak to somebody at Facebook. They help you out. You set up a budget, and then they say, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I just want to be global." And so then they actually send it off to different markets. And so for some reason, India was accepting it at the most affordable price. And so it got picked up the most, my marketing got picked up. So it's interesting, so I was going for Canada and the United States as my number 1 and 2, but India literally happened because I didn't, it's just kind of a happy accident, and just, no issues with that, right? So yeah, and you can kind of see in chronological, this is kind of the order of the countries where it's been picked up and had some success. Yeah, so that's that. A little bit on the audience. So my audience is skewed a little bit more to male, so it's 57% to 42-ish%. And then my numbers around the age group is 28 to 34 is about 43%, and 35 to 44 is around that same mark, and then it drops off 45 to 60. And now the interactive part. I want to ask a few of you, we'll take a couple minutes, if you want to raise your hands. This helps me and will help you frame what you want to learn from the session. It'll help me kind of, add that little extra bit of tidbit of information. If you guys want to maybe raise your hands and share why you're here today, if anyone's willing to do so.
Okay, yeah. So I've written a book on older people dating online.
Okay, fantastic.
Darla's Last Kick at the Can.
Wow.
It's on Amazon.
You've read a book called, what's it called again?
Darla's Last Kick at the Can.
Darla's Last Kick at the Can, okay.
And it's your last kick at the can, you're older.
Yeah, yes.
You're online dating.
Yes.
Okay, so that's that. And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to do a podcast and have older women, widowed, divorced, and have their say, have a moment.
Uh-huh.
And how did they transition to the new life if you're widowed, and if somebody's recently divorced, well, they have a lot to say.
Right.
With a lot of cursing in the middle of it all, I can imagine. So that's why, and that's why.
Fantastic, that's great. And you're just getting started.
Yes.
Very good.
I've come to a number of classes here.
Good. Anybody else want to share? Yeah.
So I am a therapist and a yoga instructor who's kind of specializing in nervous system regulation these days. There's a lot of podcasts out there that are doing similar things, but I've started to realize that I have a lot of interesting people in my life and a lot of really depth and authentic stories to tell and share with the world. So it's more about not necessarily the healing stuff, which some of that I'm sure will come in, but more about actually just allowing people to meet very interesting people and hear
Fantastic.
great conversations.
That's great. That's awesome. Anybody else?
I had a random idea of interviewing people who are on some sort of career gap or just taking a gap year and seeing what their experiences were, or what caused them to take a gap, because I think we're in a society where everyone's always trying to do too much these days, and it's always nice to kick back and relax. But unfortunately, we all kind of suck at figuring out how to do that. So
That's right. That's awesome. Could see a title there, Gap Year. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Anyone else want to share? Okay. All right. That's totally cool. Well, let's keep going here. So let's go straight into. So you're starting a podcast. What are the top 5 questions that you need to ask? Top 5 really big ones is, who is your audience? Is it a student? Is it an office worker? Someone skilled in trades? Is the person married? Are they retired? Where is your audience? Is it local? Is it global? Does it matter to you? Think podcasting goals here when you're thinking about your audience, because your audience really does matter. Why will people tune in? So is it purely for entertainment? Is it for laughs? Is it for information? Is it news? Is it therapy? Is it support? And are you going to put the marketing that you need to help make it happen? And what type of podcast are you creating? So we'll share some other slides on this, and this is really interesting. So true crime, comedy, news, science, history, fiction, tech, business, society, and culture. There's a ton of subgenres and then subgenres within these genres. And this is a really important piece to the puzzle here if you're getting started and you want to try to position yourself somewhere where you're going to rise in the charts. So how will you make your podcast stand out in the crowd? Well, there's tools, there's planning, recording, editing. There's a bunch of work. I'm not going to lie to you. There is work involved in doing this. There's a lot of different hats you need to wear. And I'll show you, or I'll tell you the technique that I used that burnt me out the first time I did it, and then has allowed me to do it with a lot more enjoyment more recently. Okay. So, question, interactive here. So, by raise of hands, how many podcast episodes were released globally in 2023? How many will say 15 million? 15 million. No one says 15 million. Okay, 80 million. 80 million. 80 million. Okay, we got 80 million, maybe about 20%. 30 million? 30 million. Pretty big number for 30 million. Okay, 5 million. 5 million. One person for 5 million. Okay, and the answer is, and I also, for the majority who got this right, well done. The actual answer is 30 million. This is episodes. This is episodes. So I will explain this, but this is a yearly average now. Now 30 million is going to sound like a lot, but the reality is, if you look at the table here first, you look at the amount of songs that are out there, 70 million, movies, 8.3, audiobooks, not that much. But the interesting thing here is that of that 30 million of the published episodes, in terms of active podcasts, there's only 3.3 million. 3.3 million. So maybe that still sounds like a ton, but I think the really interesting thing to remember here is that even though we've got 30 million podcasts, it could be someone just playing around. Like, the barriers to entry and getting into podcasting is very simple. I'll show you some of the basics of how to create. Literally by end of tonight, if you wanted to go home, publish a podcast, you could. I'm not sure how good it would be in doing it in the next, I don't know what time you go to bed, but it could be brilliant, who knows. But I guess Joe Rogan does get one every day, and he does have a few followers, right? What I'm trying to say by this stat here is that there are a lot of people publishing podcasts, but what's the quality of them? Do they really have a plan? Do they have a strategy? Do they have an approach? Do they have an understanding of what it takes to move forward and to stand out in the crowd? So keep that in mind. So good news if you're getting started. So in 2023, there were approximately 3.2 to 4.3 million total podcasts available globally. However, a significant proportion of these were considered inactive. Now, inactive means nothing new's been published within 3 to 6 months. It's estimated that there are around 500,000 to 700,000 podcasts which were active, meaning that they had released at least one new episode in 2023. This implies that there could be over 2.5 million to 3.8 million inactive podcasts. So there's a ton of numbers out there, but I think just the thing to think about for these past few slides is don't worry about the crowd. Know that if you are serious about getting into podcasting, it's about setting up a long runway for yourself. And that's really what tip number one is. So I think how to stand out in the crowd, number one, is have a long runway. So having a long runway means that you'll determine how many episodes you'll have in your season. You'll create a release schedule, being it new weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. You'll release new episodes on the same day. When I first got going on this, I was releasing weekly, and it was on a Monday, and that did burn me out. And you don't have to release every week if you don't want to. A great podcast, a great following, people will wait. They will wait 2 weeks. They will wait 3 weeks. But if they will be looking for some level of consistency if it's something you're willing to do. And tip number 4 here, under tip 1, is do not start releasing a podcast until you've given yourself a 2 or 3 month head start. I think this is really, really crucial and critical, And if I know it's probably going to be really hard because you've made this amazing podcast and you want the world to hear it. You've made 6 of them, but no one's heard a single, except for maybe you've got a little beta test group, but no one's heard it. But the reason you want to hold off is it's not just about releasing the podcast. Unfortunately, you're the social media manager as well, unless you somehow have a team. You have to be on top of the social media. Are you going to be blogging or writing any articles about it? Are you going to be trying to advertise in certain ways? So just because the podcast is released doesn't mean you're actually even starting on the next one. There's still a lot of other work, and I certainly burnt myself out doing that the hard way, where I was focusing a ton on production, and then I was on top of trying to create the next episode ready, I was also doing the marketing and all that stuff. So please keep that in mind. Yeah.
What's the cadence of all of that are you going to answer that question?
The cadence of kind of the work?
Yeah.
So I'll get into it. I mean, it'll be at the very end where we talk a little bit specifically on marketing.
Okay.
I think that we'll come back to that, but I think the short answer on that is that you're releasing the podcast on a day that makes sense. We have so much, and now with the Chat GPT and all this, you can ask questions like, what's the day of the week when people listen to this type of podcast the most? So I think these AI tools, if you know how to prompt them, you can learn a lot of information really quickly. I think that's going to be a really big question. Find out when your audience is listening and what duration, and we'll share some of those other pieces. And then it's knowing what time to post on your social media platforms. People will check LinkedIn, people will check their Instagram at certain times of the day, and it's knowing when to do that. Yeah. Any other questions on this slide? Yeah, and feel free to raise your hand and ask a question at any time here. So, is podcasting still a growth market? So absolutely it is. There's so much growth and opportunity here. So only 29% of Canadians as monthly listeners spend 5 hours per week listening to podcasts. Now think about how much time you may or may not spend watching Netflix or watching movies or surfing your social media. I don't think 5 hours is very much. I think that there's a huge growth opportunity in that first step. 42% of Canadian monthly listeners are age 18 to 34. That's a great growth market. That's where people are moving forward in their lives, looking for new things, looking for new ideas. They're ready to spend money. They're ready to listen. They want to learn. Same thing with the 35 to 49, that's 32%. So I think you've got some really important key demographic numbers here that are primed to listen to your podcast, and there's still a lot of growth opportunity there. Spotify and YouTube are the most popular platforms for listening in Canada right now as well. So that's really important to know because you want to know where you want to publish. So my podcast is on Spotify. I've just set up an automated RSS feed so that it automatically gets downloaded into YouTube. And this is all purely automated that YouTube will do for me. I don't cover this in this presentation, but I would look at how to get things onto YouTube that are automated, and so that you don't have to do work. There are a lot of tools right now. It's getting easier and easier to publish through using automation. So how Canadians access podcasts, you've got these different age groups. I shared this because I was actually surprised that people listen to podcasts off of Amazon Music. I mean, I didn't know that. I certainly don't. But there's the YouTube and the Spotify stats and Apple Music as well. Obviously, Apple's a big one. So there's some stats there. And then just a little bit more on global statistics, and we'll move on into some other stuff, but I just wanted to share as well that it's a growing market. They're expecting $15.7 billion to come from in revenue to come from 2023 to 2028, and so like crazy growth. So really big numbers. Right now in Canada, it's 127 million. So there's some other numbers here around brand awareness, and that 70% of podcast listeners turn off and skip advertising. I don't think that's a big number, especially if you look at a lot of people buying things off of podcasts. Well, you'll get a chunk of it, right? So if you, so I just to level set. So don't go into podcasting to think you're gonna that's gonna be paying your mortgage and your bills and all that stuff. Get in because you want to share a message. It's an avenue of it's something that I think has to be a passion project to start, but I think there's a lot of potential for revenue sharing, and as you can see, there is numbers coming here. So yeah, so there are numbers coming there. Okay, so how to make your podcast stand out in the crowd. So the number one tip for tonight, I know I said that setting up a long runway is important, but I think this is also super important. So here's your Canadian genres. So what you've got here is you've got comedy, you've got news and current affairs, you've got true crime, society and culture, health and wellness, technology, business. But then what's really interesting is you have all these subcultures or subcategories. And within these subcategories, this is where you want to position yourself so that your podcast, when you're selecting your genre, you're not just selecting comedy, you're selecting comedy and satirical news. Or if you're like me, you're selecting society and culture with philosophy and how-to. So I'm under two different types of charts, under philosophy and how-to, because I started out under how-to thinking, I think my podcast is how-to, and it turned out it really wasn't. It was more philosophy. And so that's okay. You know, what's really interesting is that you position yourself in these charts, and then you can watch and see what happens. You can switch it to a different category, subcategory. And I think this is a really, really key thing to keep in mind. This slide, I think, is really important because what you want to do some research on is where are you in terms of your genre and what is your subgenre. And then the very next important question is around your competition. So this is tip number 2. So select a genre with less competition. So what I mean by this is if everyone's releasing true crime, stay away from true crime. So you could be competing with tens of thousands of true crime stories, or you could go somewhere else where maybe you've only got 100 or 1,000 people or 1,000 podcasts that you're competing with. So look for genres that have less competition so you get noticed. So this is your sandbox. This is a place where you can climb the charts. And sure, if you want to move on to a different genre, you're certainly welcome to do so. But the tip I put here is if you want to do true crime, you could actually put it under society and culture, and you could watch your podcast climb faster. It's all about how you want to position the genre and what you're doing. So you can really, there's a ton of flexibility on where you want to position your podcast. A little bit more on this piece. So thinking genre and thinking outside the box on format. So you want to research your competition and what they're doing. You want to publish to the genre with less competition. You want to think outside the box with format. So if you're doing self-help, tell it in a story format. So I used how-to and philosophy, but my podcast was is heavily on story format in many, many episodes. So I have a bunch of interviews, but the majority of my podcasts start out with some sort of story. Create a title and artwork to your podcast that's easy to read and understand. I certainly made that mistake where I put, this is the version of the podcast title you see now is the most simplified view I've had, but I've had very complex ones as well, because there is a ton of information saying that people will click on your podcast if they see a compelling piece of artwork with a title that is easy they can understand, okay, this is going to be about comedy, or this is going to be about whatever, right? And then look for search engine optimizers or AI to help you write your content. So just really quickly, search engine optimizers, there's tons of important stuff here, but you want to include strategies on metadata. So those are kind of like piece of metadata would be like a question. How do I play tennis? You want to do a tennis podcast. So it could be asking these questions within the material that you put out there so that it is picked up by a Google search engine. getting stuff like this, so you could include transcripts, blog posts, collaborations with others. There's a ton of different things, but I think for this slide, just write down SEO, search engine optimizers, for your podcast and do some digging around that. It's not a ton of stuff that you need to do, it's just kind of that initial setup. So it's not something you have to do on a weekly basis, but getting it set up out the gate. Now, for those who have never started a podcast, I highly recommend, if you've never gone and taken that first step, I highly recommend Spotify for podcasters. It was originally, I used Anchor. Anchor was bought out by Spotify, and now it's called Spotify for Podcasters. And it's an easy step-by-step guide. So you just search Spotify for Podcasters, and it will walk you through every step of the way in getting that set up. So I took a few screenshots. You'll see information here around the, your description, your title, the story, and all that kind of information that you need to put in here, your image and stuff like that. Okay, so that's what I would recommend. This is now, so if you're wondering what I did for my podcast, this is season 2, episode 2 of the Authentic You podcast, and how I described it is, in this podcast, we are in search of life's most deep and profound truths, the false beliefs that might be holding us back, and the most underrated tools to help transform any career. If you love raw, real-life stories, cinematic storytelling, and empowering interviews that leave no stone unturned, subscribe today. Hosted by me, and then my little production company is a mixed potato salad production. So yeah, I like that. Something like that. So something that really is going to have some punch and some hook and some impact, and it's going to make someone want to tune in, like to really, I think something like that will help pull someone in. So artwork, I just wanted to touch on artwork. If you're wondering, well, how do I make a podcast cover? Is that hard? Is it easy? It's super easy, but you're going to be spoiled for choices. Canva.com, and I highly recommend pay-as-you-go. I'm definitely a sucker for a good deal and buying a year's worth of something, and then you only use it for a month or two. And then my wife's like, why did you buy a year's subscription to this thing that you only used a few times? So Canva.com, and they have a whole bunch of, so you go under projects and you look for podcasts, and they'll have the exact dimensions that you need. So I highly recommend Canva, and no, I don't get paid any royalties or residuals for saying that, but that's just what I use. So you can use it. You can use it for 1 month, and then you can use it for 1 month. Have your login account, and I think it's like $16 for like a month, and you can turn it off and then go back to it. Say you're only doing a podcast once every 3 months, and you need to go back and tweak something in your cover. You can go back later. So they're pretty fair about it. Okay, so number 3 on how to stand out in a crowd is determine your season schedule. So in terms of your episode count before you begin. So I think this is really important. I had no idea how many episodes I was going to have for my first season when I got started. Turns out I stopped at 17. It wasn't really the plan. That just kind of what happened. I think I was trying to get to 20, but I realized I didn't really need to, and I just kind of stopped. I perfectly honest, I stopped because I was burnt out. I was doing so many things at once, and I was releasing them, by the end, still trying to do on a weekly basis, but it was a struggle. And so I would actually, if you go and you look this up yourself, there are a lot of podcasts that have as few as 6 episodes in a season. There is some stats out there that say like there's 10 to 20. Personally, I don't think that you need to get all the way up to 20. I think doing a first season, doing 6 to 10, and getting a feel and a flavor for what you enjoy the most, I think is really important, and that's gonna help you avoid the burnout. And again, I put that same last bullet there around giving yourself a 2 or 3 month head start to do that, to get it all kind of set up. Okay.
How long should a podcast last?
Were you looking at my presentation? This is great. So, a good number is 20 to 40 minutes. So what they say is it's optimal because if you think about activities that people do, so going to the gym, commuting, exercising, going for a walk, typically that's a 20 to 40 minute type thing. And I think if you can help someone get all the way through your podcast by not having too long of a length, that's a good starter. Again, Joe Rogan, he'll have a 4-hour podcast episode, but Joe Rogan is kind of one of a kind. You've got some podcasters that only do 10 to 20 minutes. I'm actually enjoying something called Smologies right now, which is kind of this abbreviated thing about, I was listening to an episode of Smologies, and I think it was less than 20 minutes about space junk. And I thought that was quite interesting, and it was just this very short bite-sized bit of info. But yeah, you can certainly go longer to 40 to 60 minutes. I was trying to get between 20, 30, I don't think ever really 20, I think 30, 45 minutes was the length of time I was trying to do for some. And now the more recent releases I've done is I have a almost 2-hour episode, and it was just basically just a really great long interview, and I didn't want to cut any of it. So yeah. Okay.
It's like a really good episode of Q.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to cut it. Yeah, you just want to keep going with it, right?
Just talk it.
So the other piece to this is make it a story. So again, I'm sharing what's worked really well for me. So if you're doing, even if you're doing a gap year and you're looking at interviewing people, and what I'll share with you as we go further down, or you're looking at, could be a blend of yoga instruction and, self-help and all those kind of pieces together, you'll have a concept, you'll have your interview, and then what I recommend is listen to the content you've created and think about what's the soul behind your story, what's come from it. And so what I list here is, or what I write here is, stories convey lessons, morals, beliefs, and connect to listeners. Stories disarm the listener with compelling narratives. Stories are as old as time, and they are remembered. And stories maintain engagement of the listener. So even if your podcast is an interview, and again, many of mine are, give an intro that provides an overall story or hook to that episode. And I personally believe, now, this is something where I don't believe with the stats that I'm seeing, because what you can see with your podcast, once you become a podcaster, is you can see drop-off rates. And I can see certain podcasts where I put so much time, so much effort, there's all these funny bits and emotionally fantastic elements, but they're 20 minutes in or 30 minutes in, and the first minute I spent advertising something about coming back and doing this, or just too many calls to action right out the gate, and I can see these drop-offs, and it's just so disheartening. So I think when someone has clicked, that most precious time is that first minute to 5 minutes, is put something in that's really compelling, that people will really want to listen to and engage with, because I think you only have a few minutes, especially if they've never heard you. If you have loyal fans, they may just fast forward a little bit saying, oh, Goran, you're going on and on again. But if you're just getting started, I'd highly recommend kind of honing that. And that's what this is all about. So we'll show you some of that. Okay, so more on how to make your podcast stand out. So we're going to get into something most podcasters never do, and it's layer editing. Okay. So before I get into layer editing, again, I just want to call out Inspiration Lab. They've got a ton of info, ton of classes. Look up, type in Inspiration Lab. They have two 1.5-hour podcasting classes. One's called Let's Talk Podcasting, and then Podcast Editing with Reaper. So this Emily is over there. If you have additional questions at the end, she might be able to provide more details. The website is really good as well. It's quite fantastic. There's a ton of info there. So if you have some more basic questions on just how do I just even load my files and pieces like that, there's classes here where you can do that in person. Okay, so now back to our story. So what is intro layer editing? So layer editing is applying or stacking multiple audio clips on top of each other in a podcast. And what you can see is that being performed here. So this is an inside view of GarageBand, and I'll actually be playing, we'll be playing around with it a little bit. I'll show you a few things, but here's your first visual of it if you've never seen this before. So this is GarageBand, and you've got different audio regions and then different audio files. The gold colored lines here, this is the sound level, and you're adjusting those based on what you think is needed. And then you can see sounds are starting in different regions at different times, and this is kind of that magic behind when to put your next element in, and we'll cover that. So what is intro layer editing? So again, we're looking at these different three regions, and we're going to go through each one of them. So step one, in terms of the formula where I think intro layer editing is very valuable, is starting with an audio recording. Okay, starting with an audio recording. You're on the street, you're recording it on your phone. I think that's a fantastic way to get started. Then you're going to use your narrative overlay and put that in, and then you're going to put your background music. So let me just kind of, what does all that mean? Let me show you. So it all just kind of sounds like words now, but let me show you. So let's listen to this and I'll explain it again. We're just going to listen to the first 30 seconds of this. This is Storylines. This is CBC Listen Storylines, Adventures in Whiskeyland. We're just going to listen to the first 30 seconds by Adrian Ma. This is a fantastic episode, and this is what inspired me to take on layer editing. So hopefully the audio works.
Hello, old friend. I see you're doing well.
My name is Adrian Ma.
Me?
I'm 39.
Okay.
I live in Toronto. And right now, I'm in my bedroom closet talking to a bottle of Scotch whiskey.
Yes, it has been a while.
So the background music kicks in.
What year is it? Well, it's 2023.
Now, I don't normally keep whiskey amongst my socks and underwear, but this bottle is special.
So what's happening there, just to give you guys an actual taste of it. So again, you're starting with, and what was great, if we go back, if you think about the opening sound, it's actually the sound of a baby crying, just for a split second. So as a storyteller, that tiny sound says, maybe Adrian's a father, he's at home and he's slipped away into a back room, and he's living a really busy, hectic life, but he needs his own space to go and do that. So just that quick little baby cry, and then all of a sudden, then you hear him talking to something, and he's talking to his bottle of alcohol, and then from there you have the background, or you have the narration that kicks in, and then the background music that comes in after. So we'll come back to this slide. This is really important. But yeah, so this is that layer editing with Adventures in Whiskeyland. And just to break this down here, because I had this slide prepared. So again, step one, the live recording. So Adrian Ma is walking into his room and he's talking to his bottle of whiskey. Okay, so that's region one. Okay, so what he's doing there, most likely, I don't know Adrian, but what I'm suspecting he's doing is he's probably just recording himself on his phone. And I'll tell you what type of device I've got a Samsung phone, but I'll tell you what tool I use for free off the Samsung to do recording. But I bet he's just walked into the phone and he's just recording himself. He's planned out what he's going to do before that. This is not just random, unless he's some sort of genius, but he's planned out his script, his concept, and he said, I'm going to walk into the room and I'm going to record this stuff. Then he's gone and he's put this recording on file and he's figured out, okay, when should I start with my narrative overlay? And so this is that narrative overlay when he starts. So if I go back to this again, if I can go back. When he starts speaking over himself, I think that's he's narrating over his own voice. And I think that's quite interesting. So there's a baby crying, the door opening, I missed that. Some more walking and steps.
Hello, old friend. I see you're doing well.
My name is Adrian Ma.
Me?
I'm 39.
I can't complain.
I live in Toronto. And right now, I'm in my bedroom closet talking to a bottle of Scotch whiskey.
Yes, it has been a while.
And then there's just that subtle, that happy little subtle music of, this is a bit of comedy, it's a bit of joy, it's a bit of surprise and mystery around there. So, he's putting those elements together. But again, so that's where he's walking into the room. Step one is recording himself. He's layering in the narrative overlay as that hook. And I think that's giving you your soul of the story. It's like, this is going to be interesting. This guy's got an interesting story to tell, so I want to listen to that. So he's putting that into region 2. And then step 3, background music, he's layering in the background music to give kind of that feeling that you're about to experience in the podcast. So here's a sample of Joseph Kakwino Kanusum, season 2, episode 2 from my podcast. So Joseph was the writer in residence here very recently, and I had a chance to interview him. And the opening clip here, we'll come back to it. I think what I'm going to do is there's 6 minutes I want to share, and I think we'll do kind of 1 minute intervals, so you kind of get a sense of what's happening here. But let me share that with you next. So, and this is what it looks like for the audience. This is podcasters on Spotify. Let me click on this here. And let's go here. And we are recording. We're heading to I'm here with Joseph. We're heading to the Vancouver Public Library. He's going to give me a tour of his office space. That's me walking. What floor are you on?
I'm on the 8th floor.
I'm walking with Joseph Kakwino
Now
Kanusum.
you can hear the narration.
He's a Canadian
overlay.
award-winning Indigenous author from the Cree Nation. Joseph is humble and upbeat. He's a survivor, but he's so much more.
Okay, I'll just do 30 seconds there because we'll show you that in the actual GarageBand tool itself. But I just wanted to give you a little taste. So I don't do it exactly the same way as Adrian Ma does. I layer in the sound, so you'll hear me walking down the street first for just maybe 5-10 seconds, saying, and we are recording. That's me literally just a block away down the street here walking with Joseph. And we're just kind of chit-chatting, tell me about what's going on, Joseph, and then I put in the background music, meant to kind of to stir some emotions, to create a little bit of intensity and to kind of bring the reader in, or the listener in to understand, okay, something important is happening here. Then I layer in myself in the narrative, the narrative type hook. So again, just what I mentioned. So the live on the street recording is me walking and talking with Joseph. So you can hear traffic and city noise. Again, we'll play it again and we'll give you a lot more of that. But I really want to walk you through this sequence because I think most podcasters don't know how to do this. So hopefully you'll understand this by the end today. So step 1 is we're doing a live recording. Step 2 is my background music. This is the emotional build. And then step 3 is the hook of the story. Again, this is the soul of it. And this is all layering within about 25 seconds. If you listen again to Adrian Ma's Adventures in Whiskeyland, his happened within about 25 seconds as well. So I just want to stop and talk a little bit about tools for podcasting, for layer editing. So you don't have to be discouraged if you don't have a Mac and don't have GarageBand. There are a lot of other applications that you can use. I see Adobe Audition, I see Audacity being popular selections, and you can see they are options that Audacity certainly is free. So you kind of have a list here of free podcast editing tools. You have some great lists. Just do a search depending on, if you have a budget, you need it to be free. But I use GarageBand just because I have a Mac, and it was another reason than it was with my Mac. So that was kind of the reason for myself. And then, kind of going into what's happening again, if we go into my recording, what's happening in step 1 is this is where we're talking about exactly that tool. So I have my Android phone and I have something called Easy Voice Recorder. Okay, and it's just free, it comes along with the phone, but just virtually any free voice recorder that you get on your phone is something that I highly recommend using. I think walking around and recording yourself with somebody, having that feel of the city, it's kind of like, I don't know if you know much about 60s, 70s movies. There was the 16 millimeter camera and that energy that you kind of feel of being out in the streets and having the noise of traffic and the people and the hustle and all of that stuff that's going on around you. I think there's something to be said for having pieces of that. And then of course, Zoom is what I use for call recording. So a lot of my calls will be via Zoom. And it's just an easy tool to use, lots of info on how to use it. And you want to save those and then put that information in an audio file that you're literally just right-clicking and adding that audio file to the region that you're putting it in. And this is something you're going to want to add as a WAV or an MP3 type file. So step 2 in terms of narrative overlay. So if you're running an interview, add a narrative overlay at intro or layer it throughout. So in Andrew Ma's podcast, he actually does layer it throughout. Now it does take a bit more effort and work to do that. It is a bit time consuming. I recommend if you're getting started, focus on just trying to put it into the intro. If you're trying to hook that listener in, do the narrative overlay at the beginning. You have to spend some time on it to get it right, but you don't have to worry about it. You can just be pure interview thereafter. But certainly there's a bunch of podcasts where they're adding that narrative overlay throughout. It does add to the richness of the podcast for sure, but again, I don't think it's absolutely required. So again, step number 2, this is your narrative overlay, and you want to use that as your hook. And kind of going into podcasting audio tips, I use Blue Yeti. So if you're kind of wondering, well, what kind of mic do I use, or what kind of mic should you use? There's plenty of options out there, but I use Blue Yeti. I noticed it's on sale now. Again, I don't make any money off of saying that, but that's there. And then so this is actually really important. Before you start recording your first podcast, there is some prep, there's a bunch of prep work, and one of the pieces is, what's your podcasting voice? So do you have a little bit too much brightness in your voice? Do you want to bring it down a little bit, have a little bit more bass? Or do you have too much bass and you want to reduce that? So you can play around with your podcasting voice. There are a number of preset type files in the library where you've got bright and classical, and if we have time we'll go through and might sample a couple of those. But yeah, these are the actual ones that I've created over the years. You see, I've got one from 2021, and I just keep using that one. I think it just has a good middle ground. It's not far from what my voice sounds like. It just has, I think, a little bit more bass to it, which I think just is great for storytelling. Okay, and for voice recording, let me just so the other thing that's happening now for voice recordings is that you actually now have AI generated audio that you can get. So this I found pretty interesting. But so I use, and in terms of my background music, I use Artlist. And Artlist, I find just you can get tons of great music and all that stuff. But if you want to use something where, say you need an actor for a position in your podcast, you certainly can type in your script, and I did this last night, and I wanted a professor voice and I wanted a charmed voice. So here's a sample. Let's see if it plays.
I'm walking with Joseph. He's the Indigenous writer in residence at the Vancouver Public Library, and he's about to give me a lesson in Cree time.
So, and then And here's another.
I'm walking with Joseph. He's the Indigenous writer in residence at the Vancouver Public Library, and he's about...
Welcome to the future. So I don't know what that's going to do to the voice actor business, but yeah, say you're putting a story together, or you don't want to use your voice at all. There you have options now to this potentially could be, the approach you take. So yeah, that's hot off the press. I think that's very newly released. Artlist, artlist.io. Yeah, sorry, I went past that pretty quickly.
Is that part of Artlist?
Yeah, that's on Artlist. Yeah, that's on Artlist as well. Yeah, voice record. Yeah, so voice recordings. Yeah, I think I cover Artlist a little bit further, but yeah, that's Artlist. Artlist.io. Artlist.io. Okay. Okay. So background music. Okay, so let's go back. Now I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. So you can see background music here and volume adjustment. So this is what the podcast looks like behind the scenes in GarageBand. I am going to go full screen here and just show you these, and let's play this from the start again. And I think we'll play, let's see, we'll try to go to that full minute here.
And we are recording.
So there's
We're
my
heading
background music.
to the, I'm here with Joseph. We're heading to the Vancouver Public Library. He's going to give me a tour of his
Here's my
office
narration
space.
about to kick in.
What floor are you on?
I'm on the 8th floor.
I'm walking with Joseph Kakwino-Kanas.
And you can see here, you see the gold line here. So what I've done here is I've reduced his volume way down. It's not to zero. You can still hear that he's there a little bit in the background. Actually, I was testing this with my wife. She said, your background is too high. It was too confusing. So it's getting that fine balance and testing it out with someone. But yeah, you're going to be, so you've got your main audio clip. So you're just letting it run. So the simplicity of it is that you're going to have this full audio clip. And what I'm saying is I'm willing to sacrifice this piece of what he's saying here because I'm going to capture it for him, or I'm going to make, or I know that during the 2-hour-long interview we do later that he's already mentioned some of this stuff already. And so I do the voiceover to create that initial hook.
He's a Canadian award-winning Indigenous author from the Cree Nation. Joseph is humble and upbeat. He's a survivor, but he's so much more. And he's given me a lesson in Cree time, in how everything in life is a circle.
Privileged and honored.
Go back to
I scored huge, right? I mean, like, I think about it, right? Like, I was talking to some of the librarians.
Narration part
To say
2.
that Joseph has had a hard life would be an understatement. He told me his childhood wasn't really a childhood. He left home at the age of 14. He's worked as a prison guard, security guard, bicycle courier, librarian, truck driver, and now finally he's found his home as an author. But he's not just any author. Joseph is the 2024 Storyteller in Residence at the Vancouver Public Library. And he's about to give me a sneak peek of his new digs.
I'll just keep
And
it
so
playing.
when did you become the writer in residence?
So this is
there?
me
How
just
long? It's
talking
been
and
a couple of
just doing
months
this.
almost?
February 6th, I believe, was my first day.
Okay.
And
Background music's
I'm
still
finished
going. It's just
on
very subtle in the background.
The 26th of May. Yeah, my last day I'll be working at Carnegie Library on the downtown east side.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just doing some volunteer work with the outreach groups. Doing
What do you
writing consults.
man.
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
I'm just, writing as a catharsis, kind of.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking earlier about the, just the whole act of healing through writing.
And there's
And,
some good quiet space where there's no
And that's
music.
kind
You're
of
just
where
kind of
I'm
hearing
going
the
with that
conversation.
particular
And now I'm
thing.
going to increase,
Let's,
give it a little bit more
let's go in
music
the
again.
secret way.
We're going the secret side door
So he's giving
where
me-
staff entrance. This is fantastic.
Take people in this little room here.
You can hear us, like, where are we? It's kind of like, trying to figure it
Oh
out.
wow, this is
This is a direct elevator right to my floor.
So I'm being blindfolded right now, and no, I'm just joking. Yeah, so we are in a secret orange library hallway. Fantastic.
This is access
Express
only.
levels.
I got podcaster special
Joseph and I
access.
have known each other for about an hour. The
And
hour
again-
it's taken for us to eat our lunch.
So again, back to
But
the narration.
There's a connection there. I feel a kinship. Sometimes people just click. This, I think, is something that happens when you find your community, when you find those in search of the same questions in life, questions that seem to have impossible answers.
Just doing, I know this is now your third writer in residence event. Is there things that you've learned that...
In our interview, Joseph reflects on the past experiences and emotions that have informed and influenced his life. We talk about trauma and the importance of recognizing patterns and behaviors to avoid repeating past mistakes. Joseph gives us some of his best writing tools and techniques used for structured writing and methods on how to start and actually finish your next novel.
Attain a goal. Like, I mean, I've learned that I can do it.
Right now, we're on the 8th floor of the Vancouver Public Library. We've arrived via our top
So the
secret
music's
VIP
changed now.
elevator.
Now it's more wonder.
There's a
and
dozen long rectangular tables filled with students studying, typing, and talking. It's quiet, but there's a buzz, a feeling that those here are getting things done. Joseph is explaining how he's managed to do something incredible. He's finished a manuscript in 1 month.
We're entering into the creative residency office with Joseph's name on the
big room.
board.
It's a
And
pretty
so,
big
whoa,
room, yeah.
look, we're in a massive space here. Whoa.
My manuscript all spread out, all these three tables. 50
more wonder. Increase the volume on the
26
music.
pages.
He's showing me his wall.
This is where
Okay, now he's opened the door here. White, everything's white on white room, and it's just we've got a board here with his actions, and you tell me what's on here.
word counts.
Welcome to the Authentic You podcast, and this is my interview with award-winning author Joseph Kakwinu-Kanusu, a man who now does the knocking, a man who will not be knocked out.
I need all the wins, yeah. Ain't no L's, I gotta get a no call and quits.
Okay, and so I closed with that music. You see the big music switch, because now this is going to be all about Joseph, and he is really someone who was knocked down as a kid, but really is, he can't be knocked out, and I just was searching around for music. I'm like, I need something powerful, empowering, and I thought that music was really great. And so this is my intro. I give a bit more and who he is and all that stuff, but that gives you a good feel of the various levels and layers. And I think just kind of, if you're able to stop and take a moment to say, okay, what really was this podcast episode about? Go back, and if you can apply that layer, I think that layer of the narration with some sort of background music. I think that really changes what happens. And I think just to play around with this a little bit, I want to show you what happens. So you heard that so if you recall the background music here, the background music was, I won't play it again, you heard it a few times, so you know what it was. But if I hit the mute on the background music here, and I've already preloaded some horror music. So nothing else has changed. It's a bright sunny day. We're walking towards the library. My narration voice is the same, and I've added horror music to start. So check this out.
And we are recording. We're heading to I'm here with Joseph. We're heading to the Vancouver Public Library. He's going to give me a tour of his office space. What floor are you on?
I'm on the 8th floor. I'm looking.
I'm walking with Joseph Kakwinu-Kanusu. He's a Canadian award-winning Indigenous.
So as you can see, just little things. We are so easily influenced by music. We are really easily influenced by music. It impacts, or you're in a bad mood, put on happy music, or if you're slightly in a neutral state, don't put on sad music. It really impacts us. And so again, this was from artlist.io. on the music. And why? So there's many places you can get music. Make sure wherever you go that it is royalty free. You can go as well to YouTube. I don't recommend, YouTube has a bunch of free stuff. It's okay, but I think that so what you can do with this is you can get I'm not sure how many files you can download, but you can just get it for 1 month, download a whole bunch of files, and then you don't have to pay like the yearly membership for artist.io. But yeah, and I want to play around a little bit with that. And in terms of, what else was I going to show you? Yeah, in terms of the voice patches, so I wanted to show you maybe the user patches a little bit as well. So if I go back to the beginning, and you heard the voice that I was using before, if we were to use so here's all these different options here.
And we are recording.
Oh, that didn't
We're
load.
heading
I'm not sure why that didn't load for some reason. Oh, let's see.
to the, here with Joseph. We're heading to the Vancouver Public Library. He's going to give me a tour of his office space. What floor are you on?
I'm on the 8th floor. I'm
walking with Joseph Kakwino-Kanasan.
Yeah.
He's a Canadian award-winning Indigenous author from the Cree Nation. Joseph is humble and upbeat. He's a survivor, but he's so much more.
So these are
and he's given me a lesson in Cree time, in how everything in life is a circle.
I scored huge. Right?
Who wants to hear helium voice?
Talking to some of the library
He told me his childhood wasn't really a childhood. He left home at the age of 14. He's worked as a prison guard, security guard, bicycle courier, librarian.
All right, we'll stop there. You can actually, the other thing I don't really go into here, but you can actually slow down the speed of your podcast as well. You see the top here, you can actually slow down your speed of the podcast up here. So we won't go into that. So now I've mashed up my podcast, but just checking on the time here, and I want to save time for questions, 10 minutes for questions at the end. So yeah, so I hope I've given you some good insight behind the scenes of the podcast editing process. And again, the volume adjustment there. And it's really trial by error. It's listening to something, have decent speakers or a headset where you can listen to it. And keep in mind that if you overproduce it, if you put too much bass, too much treble, people may also have an equalizer set up on their own system. So you may not want to overproduce those sounds. You may want to try to, like I go a little bit above what my natural voice is with the bass. But you want to kind of be careful not to overdo it, because it may muffle, it may sound kind of warped and muffled because other people have equalizers. Okay. Yeah, so podcasting music, I use Artlist, as mentioned. We spoke about kind of the volume adjustments there as well. And yeah, I wanted to close with marketing tips. I think we're near the end here. Yeah, okay, so word of mouth. So when you get your podcast launched, I highly recommend this one sentence. So you'll start off your podcast with your great hook. Didn't really get too much into that. You're gonna have some sort of introduction to what the story is about. So you see that I did that in today's episode. It's kind of natural, right? In today's episode, we are going to discuss. You do that. And then a lot of podcasts, they have kind of their, you're watching a sitcom on TV, there's your intro music that you have. After your intro music, you get into the things that you need to talk about. And if you're getting one call of action in, I would say it's, quote unquote, if you could recommend, if you're enjoying this podcast, can you recommend it to just one friend? Don't be greedy. Don't ask for 5, don't ask for 10, but ask if you can recommend it to just one friend. Because it does spread like wildfire if it's hitting the right spot, right? If it's hitting the right market, if people are enjoying it, they absolutely will recommend it. So number 1 is that. Number 2 is connect to your community. So if you are a yoga instructor, if you're a tennis player, if you're an astronomy amateur, if you're a writer, where are the people in your life, and what are they doing? So interview those people that you know and love. As Sarah mentioned earlier, she knows a lot of very interesting people. So you want to share, you want to bring them in and have them share your story. You're sharing your community, but they're sharing their story at the same time. So if you have a community that you can connect with, I think it's a fantastic idea to start off in that type of manner. And connect to events and to causes. So this is not all about me, it's not all about you. It's make the podcast a benefit to others. Is there a charity that you love? Is there a cause you care about? Can you interview someone who's trying to raise funds to help fight cancer? So get involved and see where you can actually help. Because the really interesting thing is, so I mentioned I have the website theinspired.com. There's so much more, and I've had a bunch of success there, but there just seems to be so much more weight to being a podcaster. People really, I find it has opened a lot of doors for me. It's given me a lot of new opportunities, and don't be selfish. Do good with that so-called power. If you're going to be a voice of influence, I highly recommend looking at the events and causes that matter to you. So social media and online marketing does also work. So we go back to that one of the first slides of India being my top market. So Facebook leads is a great approach, and Facebook marketing in general. There's tons of information on there, and if you set up a budget of like $10 a day, it doesn't have to be a crazy amount of money. You can set up $10 a day for like 2 weeks or 1 month, like have a bit of a budget. But I would recommend doing something like that. It is a bit of money to spend, but if you're trying to get some awareness going, it is absolutely something that I did for I'd say kind of the first 3 months of getting started. I haven't been spending any money on marketing or leads or anything for years and years. But I do think, so right now what's interesting is, I think the last time I was here, I just happened to notice, and I mentioned to Emily that all of a sudden I was on the charts in Italy. And I don't actually know why. But sometimes what happens, and I think what happens is, someone will post your podcast on their website. And they won't tell you, and it's just kind of posted there. And it's because I've got podcasts that are on the Olympics. I actually have reached out to the IOC internationally and to Canada. And so there's a professional weightlifting organization in Montreal. They ended up posting one of my podcast episodes there. And then you're putting something out there. So it was for a certain episode about weightlifting and podcasting. And so, if it's a cause that someone believes in, they're going to post it because they think that story matters, as they don't really care about your chart topping, goals. But you're doing it because you're doing it for your community, for something that matters and all that. So, I really think, the word of mouth, but the community, the events, and then putting some money aside and spending a little bit. Yeah, so I got 2,000 subscribers just kind of off doing that off the get-go. And then, Google marketing as well, if you have some budget. Again, but this is from my website, theinspired.com. I was getting a traffic volume of over 10,000 per month when I was putting spend and money in towards it. Again, I haven't been doing anything like that for a few years, but Google marketing does work if and when if you're trying to do that as well. It is, so I use Wix.com for theinspired.com. And I use that as a platform to advertise my podcasting, and so that's kind of the tool I use there. And then because I've spent money on Google, I noticed, and now they've actually sent me another one where they're willing, if I spend $1,200, they'll give me $1,200. So if you spend a little bit of money on Google ads, they will kind of dollar match those amounts, which I think is good. So I think that's that. And I think the last tip is have fun. We talk about setting up a long runway and doing all these things, and this should be a labor of love. And I think your audience is going to appreciate and see the authenticity of your joy in creating the content that you're creating. You'll create a long runway that way because you're loving what you're doing. And I think the important thing here is you don't have to, once you start podcasting, you don't have to put pressure on yourself. Like if you need to take a 6-month or 1-year hiatus, go ahead and do that. Your podcast, your tracks will sit there and they will wait for you, and you can come back to it. And so you don't have to put too much pressure on yourself. But I think number one is have fun and enjoy it, and you'll be making people experience something I think that's new and meaningful. And I think in the end, it's not about the charts. It's about giving back. It's about loving the process and having some fun. So I think that concludes the presentation today. Thank you. Thank you. So open the floor to any questions. We can go back to any slides or anything like that. If anyone had questions. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, I was a couple minutes late, so I'm not sure if you covered this.
Yeah.
My interest is to do on YouTube. So I'm thinking to do interviews. That would consider being a
Yeah,
podcast,
that's right.
Okay,
Yes,
I
yes.
wanted to
Yeah.
clarify that. Now, as a question, is there a tool out there to find out, not to copy someone's name? Is there a list of all the names of the different podcasts out there?
Sure, it's called Google search. So I made so the question was, is there a way to confirm that you're not copying the name of another podcast? And yeah, so I remember a certain conversation with my wife where I'd spent all this time in setting up my podcast. I think I was 3 episodes in or something like that, and work was work was underway and all this stuff. And so she said, well, tell me about your market research for the name of your podcast. I'm like, I didn't really do any market research. I just like the name, The Authentic You. I just really rings a bell. So I made the mistake of I may not have gone with I still love the title of my podcast. I may not have gone with it had I seen that if you type that in, you will see a number of Authentic You podcasts that exist. Now I will get hits and whatnot because I've kind of been around and stuff, which is great. But I think honestly, go and just search it out. Go and search it out. And again, you've got prompting like ChatGPT, asking it that question, it will find that for you. How many podcasts are named, The Interview Show, or whatnot? Yeah, you will absolutely find it. It's hard. What's interesting is that these stats that I presented up front, they're all very easily compiled now by AI. They're going to save you so much time. Spend time researching on your genre and your subgenre and try to do searches within AI ChatGPT for finding out information about that. They don't get too specifics on Canadian market, but I don't worry about that. I don't think anyone should worry about that. But I do strongly believe, I don't know if you heard that part, but just picking a genre where you don't have too much competition to help you kind of climb those charts. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any tips or resources for how to interview people, for example?
That's a great question. So the question is, do I have any tips or resources on how to interview people? That is a great question. So the profession that I'm in outside of the podcasting and the writing I do is I actually host a lot of interviews and meetings and stuff. So I've had the fortune of kind of through the work that I do, interviewing and discussing and having those chats. But that said, a podcast interview is a lot different than kind of meeting a bunch of people and doing that chat. I think some of the rules to remember is say you're having a podcast interview and you're setting it up with my friend Sarah. And Sarah's a little bit nervous about it's her first ever podcast interview. She's a little bit nervous. What I would recommend is say you're doing this via a Zoom call, okay? And you're about to hit the record button. Before you hit the record button, just talk to Sarah. Talk to her. Hey, how's it going? How's your day? Oh man, did you see that like the weather's been crazy. What's going on? Just just keep it real, keep it human, and just kind of calm that person's nerves. When I met with Joseph, what he revealed to me is he was a little bit nervous in the interview I did with him. He actually played his guitar. He made sure he gave himself extra time to strum his guitar before we actually had our interview to help calm his nerves. But we also kind of just spoke and chatted. And actually, there's an interview that I did. This is actually quite interesting. There's an interview I did with Debbie Chan. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but what was interesting is that, so I'll do that first, and then I'll say, okay, are you ready? And I'll give a few prompts of like, this is what we're going to talk about. I do not so if you want to try to be a journalist, journalists don't give you, here's the 20, if it's a proper journalist, they're not going to give you the 10 question. They do not give you the...
Patrons wishing to borrow material begin making their way to the checkouts on level 2. No materials will be accepted at the checkouts after 8:30.
All right, hopefully that's, yeah, so they won't give you like, here's the 10 questions I'm gonna ask you, okay? But you can give them prompts. We're gonna talk about, tell me about your life, tell me about growing up, tell me about, I was asking Joseph in the episode 2, season 2, I was asking him, tell me about your life, and he didn't wanna really go back too far, and then I kind of realized, okay, don't press it, you just gotta keep it human, and people have, there's things people are willing to share and they're not willing to share. But the thing that you just had me think of is this interview I have with season 1, episode 11. Highly recommend listening to this interview with Debbie Chan. So she's the daughter of a forgotten Chinese-Canadian Olympian. And I think it's an episode about rewriting Canadian history books, and it's really interesting. And so we do the interview, and she kept her composure, and I interviewed, and I was keeping it formal and all this stuff. We finished the interview. I kept the record button going, and I said, okay, we're done. But can we just chat? But I'm gonna keep it recording, can we just chat? Yeah. So we're chatting, and then I'm like, is there anything I forgot? A really good question to ask is there something I don't know enough about you that I should have asked but didn't? Because I don't know you that well. And so she told me a story about how her father inspired her to go on and study in medicine and all these other things that she does. And then she had this moment where she, just got really emotional. It's the most beautiful moment, I think, in the entire podcast. And I'm glad I kept recording. And then I asked her permission after, can we keep that in? And she said yes. Obviously you want to do that too. You don't want to secretly be recording when you say you're not, of course. But yeah, you can do techniques like that. So don't hit the record button early. Get people comfortable. In terms of questions, it's a two-way. It's a relationship. You're having a conversational relationship with someone, and it's trying to be balanced and fair. It's going to take practice. There's no magic bullet, but hopefully that helps. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I really recommend you listen to CBC Radio 1 or whatever it's called now. I'm showing my age. Listen to Tom Power on Q.
Oh yeah, Tom Power on Q.
He's so good, and he'll be able to, he'll understand the cadence. You'll understand how to introduce somebody. You'll understand the layering that's done.
Yeah.
When you listen to that, it's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
And it'll just give you an essence of how to do something well.
Yeah.
And learn from a pro.
He's very good.
Tom
Power, yeah.
Q.
Tom Power on Q. Tom Power on Q. Yeah. CBC Radio.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good tip. Good tip. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
One thing I've always wondered about is if you wanted to do a pop culture podcast, and so you want to talk about, say, TV shows or music or movies.
Yeah.
Can you use clips from that stuff without having to pay or getting copyright issues?
You will have, yeah, so the question is, if I wanted to do a podcast on pop culture and I wanted to share clips from movies or TV shows or other things, would there be a copyright issue? Would there be some sort of royalty issue? Yes, unfortunately, there would be. Again, what you want to do is look into royalties, look into royalty-based type issues in podcasting, and see what you can do and what you can't do. I know that there's some fan-based things where, say you want to get into certain TV shows that have not kind of gone through the roof, and you want to share a clip. You'll have to do some digging specifically on that TV show and those kind of things. If it's a big Hollywood blockbuster, I'd be surprised if they'd be happy you doing it, because you're kind of then representing them, but they've got their own huge marketing machine for their $200 million blockbuster. So it's probably, there's probably some gray lines. Even just the Olympic Committee, they don't really even want you saying Olympic or writing the word Olympics and stuff. They've got really, really strict type things. So I was kind of a little bit unsure of posting that one. No one contacted me. They didn't complain, so it was fine. Yeah, I didn't get that. I actually do have an episode. So yeah, there's weight to your podcasting. I have an episode, I think it was 17 or 16, where there was a legal team listening to, it was an episode, season 1, 16, What is Breath Work? And this was for holotropic breath work. This is to reduce trauma and stress, and there's a holotropic practitioner, Carolyn Green, she's fantastic, but I had no idea that there's these two different factions in Canada and the US, and I said something in the wrong way, and I got contacted by this legal team in the US, and they asked me to change the wording of how I said it, or to remove the entire podcast, or they would take some sort of action. So I don't know if they would or not, but yeah, just because it was misrepresenting these different organizations. So yeah, podcasting, if you want to put something out there and get noticed, people do listen. People do listen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
So you can actually edit an episode after you've published it?
Yeah, you can. Well, so the thing is, yes and no. If someone has taken a copy of it and redistributed it, then I would have been screwed. But not that I'm aware of. And so I had to take it down. I had to go, it was a process. I had to take it down, go to that, so those lines, like this, go to like the 45-minute mark and like clip pieces out. Part that we didn't kind of discuss here is you can literally, so you've got a timestamp, and you can literally go and just kind of remove a chunk of information and splice it together. Now, in terms of kind of doing interviews, what I would recommend is the more editing that you're doing over top of it, I think you lose authenticity to it. If you are umming and ahhing, as I tend to sometimes, it's okay, just leave it because it's authentic, as opposed to trying to cut all that stuff out because it's not going to be perfect, and just kind of let it flow. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Question regarding the ethics of interviewing.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering if you keep the whole interview, or do you cut?
Right.
And how much of it do you cut? And
Right.
do you check with the interviewee before you publish?
Right. Okay, so the question was, what's the ethics of interviewing? So is there, how much do you keep? How much do you cut? Do you share that with the interviewee before you go and publish? And okay, so the short answer is that there's an element of trust that's going into this relationship that's about to happen. And what I usually do is at the end of an episode, especially actually, and I did that with Carolyn Green because I knew there was something going on. I didn't know to the extent that it was happening, but I asked her at the end, is there certain things that you want me to mention or not mention? And so she gave me some stuff, and I actually put the words in the wrong. She gave it to me in the right order. I put it in the wrong order, and then that caused the issue. So you can have good intentions but still screw up. But yeah, what I try to do at the end of an episode is kind of say, I don't normally send, I mean, you certainly could, but all of this is going to cause you launching or like production issues. So if I'm doing an interview with my wife and I say, you've got a week to review this, and then I'm like, I need your edit, and so yeah, it's going to cause some issues. So I would just kind of say, is there anything in here you want me to edit out that you didn't like? And just kind of go with that. Yeah, and then the question of, there's some really good stuff at the beginning of this interview where Joseph is walking. He's saying some really important things, and I'm editing it out. Like, I'm reducing the volume down, and I don't feel great about it, but I know that it's captured later, or I know I'm capturing it for him in a stronger, more narrative voice. So it's still the same meaningful things. So you've just got to, give yourself license to do that, and then, but yeah, certainly ask the interviewee at the end, is there something here that you didn't want me to include? And typically, so one thing we didn't take is, how long does it take to get a podcast out? It can take me, if it's pure story form, it can take me up to a week to get a podcast done. If it's interview, it's much faster with just the little intro, but it can be a few days to up to a week. Yeah, go ahead.
Just piggyback on what you're saying, are you having a contract with the people?
No, I'm not. No, there's no contracts being signed. No.
Okay,
no.
so it's only a verbal consent?
It's just verbal consent, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Good one. Any other questions?
We have time for one more.
Oh yeah, it's 8 o'clock. All right, well, I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you. Yeah. If you do have any follow-up questions, you can leave your email address. I don't know, we'll find paper somewhere, but you can leave your email address, and if you have any follow-ups, yeah, you can contact us. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Just have a knack for storytelling.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.